I've spent 20 years building walls of code and skyscrapers of equity, just so I would never have to feel small in a room again. But apparently, in America, a three-piece suit is the only thing that keeps some people from seeing a criminal instead of a creator. It's funny, isn't it? You can have $1 billion in the bank. You can own the very infrastructure that people use to talk to their families. But if you're wearing a hoodie and some joggers at JFK, you're just another suspicious face in the crowd. Before we get deep into this, I want to ask you something, and I really want you to think about it. Have you ever walked into a place where you belonged? A place you paid for with your own hard-earned money, only to feel like you were trespassing? Have you ever seen that look in someone's eyes? That quick, sharp flicker of, "What are you doing here?" If you felt that weight, that invisible wall, drop a yes in the comments or tell me where you're watching this from. It helps me know I'm not just shouting into the void. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I don't just tell stories for the drama. I tell them so we can start seeing each other for who we really are. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of New York morning where the air feels like wet wool. I was headed to Silicon Valley. This wasn't just any trip. I was going to finalize a merger that had been 18 months in the making. My company, a firm that specializes in high-end aerospace software and entertainment systems, stuff that literally keeps the world moving, was about to become a household name. I should have been on top of the world. I should have been feeling like a king. But I was tired. Man, I was bone-deep exhausted. I hadn't slept in 48 hours because we were ironing out the final bugs in a massive update for Skylink, our flagship system. So, I dressed for comfort. I threw on my coding uniform, a charcoal gray hoodie, some black joggers, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. I didn't look like a CEO. I looked like a guy who might be heading to the gym or maybe just hanging out on a Saturday. When I walked into the first-class lounge at JFK, the air changed. You know that sound a room makes when it goes quiet for just a split second. That's what happened. The lounge was all glass and white marble, smelling of expensive espresso and ego. I walked up to the mahogany desk, my black titanium card in my hand, and the woman behind the counter didn't even look at the card first. She looked at my shoes, then my pants, then my face. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." She said, "Can I help you find the main terminal? Sir, this area is for premium passengers only." I felt that familiar sting, like a paper cut on the soul. I just held out the card. "I'm in the right place," I said, my voice low and steady. I've learned over the years that if I raise my voice, I'm the angry black man. If I'm too quiet, I'm submissive. I have to find that razor-thin line of professional indifference. She took the card with 2 fingers, as if it might be dirty. She swiped it. Then she swiped it again. She stared at the screen for a long time, her brow furrowed. I knew what she was seeing. My name. My status. The fact that I've flown enough miles with this airline to buy a small island. But she still didn't apologize. She just handed it back and said, "Go ahead." I found a corner seat, trying to blend into the shadows of the high-backed leather chairs. I had a conference call with my lead engineers. I put in my earbuds and started talking shop. We were discussing the integration of the admin bypass protocols, the God mode keys we use for emergency overrides. I'm talking about millions of lines of code, about $1, $2 billion in valuation, about the future of global connectivity. As I'm talking, I notice a movement in the corner of my eye. A security guard, a tall, white man with a buzz cut and a look of permanent suspicion, is standing about 10 feet away. He's not looking at the guy in the suit spilled over with a gin and tonic at 9:00 a.m. He's not looking at the woman yelling into her phone about her divorce. He's looking at me. He starts pacing. Every time I make eye contact, he touches his belt, adjusting his radio. It's a dance I've seen 1,000 times. He's waiting for me to do something wrong. He's waiting for me to reach into my bag too fast or to stand up too abruptly. It's like being under a microscope while you're trying to run a marathon. The call ended, and I felt the shrapnel of that stare digging into my back. I stood up to grab a water from the fridge, and he stepped into my path. He didn't say anything, just stood there, forcing me to walk around him. It was a power move, a tiny, petty display of I can stop you whenever I want. I made it to the gate, thinking the worst was over. I just wanted to get on that plane, close my eyes, and disappear into the clouds. There's a certain peace in being 35, 0 feet up. For a few hours, the world below doesn't matter. The rules of the ground don't always apply, or so I thought. When they called for first-class boarding, I stepped up. Again. The same ritual. The gate agent looked at my ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. She called her supervisor over. "Is there a problem?" I asked. My heart was starting to thud against my ribs, that dull, heavy beat that comes when you know you're about to be humiliated in public. Just a random security check. "Sir," she said, though she didn't check the person in front of me or the person behind me. They pulled me aside. I had to take off my shoes. I had to let them run a wand over my body while the other passengers filed past, their eyes full of that mixture of pity, and I knew it judgment. I stood there in my socks, feeling the cold floor through the fabric, thinking about my father. He used to tell me, "Son, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And once you get there, you have to work 4 times as hard just to stay." I used to think he was being cynical. Now, I realize he was just being a realist. Finally, they let me through. I walked down that long, narrow jet bridge, the air smelling of jet fuel and old carpet. I stepped onto the plane and turned left into the first-class cabin. Seat 1A, the best seat on the house. I sat down, the leather cool against my back, and let out a long, shaky breath. I was safe. I was in my element. I reached out and pressed the power button on the large, high-definition screen in front of me. I wanted to check the flight map, to see the progress of the storm we were supposed to fly around. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. The screen remained a cold, dead slab of black glass. I tried the remote in the armrest. Nothing. I looked around. The man in 1B, the same guy from the lounge who looked like he'd never worked a day in his life, was already watching a movie. His screen was bright, colorful, and perfect. I felt a surge of frustration. It wasn't just about the movie. It was about the fact that even here, in the one place where I had paid for absolute perfection, something was broken. I looked for a flight attendant. A woman in a sharp navy blazer was walking down the aisle, handing out warm towels. I raised my hand. A small, polite gesture. "Excuse me," I said as she approached. "I think my entertainment system is down." She didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She just kept walking, her eyes fixed on the back of the cabin as if I were made of glass. I waited. Maybe she didn't hear me. She came back a minute later with a tray of champagne. "Miss," I said, a bit louder this time, "my screen is broken. Could you help me reset it?" She stopped this time, but she didn't look at me. She looked at the champagne glasses. "We're in the middle of service, sir," she snapped. Her voice was like a whip, sharp and stinging. You'll have to wait your turn. Honestly, you're lucky to even have a seat on this flight, given how full it is." She moved on to seat 1B. Her voice instantly changed. It became honey and silk. "Would you like another glass, Mr. Montgomery? And can I get you a pillow for your feet?" I sat there, my hand still halfway in the air, feeling the blood rush to my face. It wasn't the broken screen anymore. It was the lucky to have a seat comment. It was the implication that I was an interloper, a charity case, someone who should be grateful for the crumbs of her attention. I looked back at the black screen. I could see my own reflection in the glass, a middle-aged black man, tired, dressed in a hoodie, looking like someone who didn't belong in seat 1A. I felt that old, familiar heat rising in my chest, the shrapnel starting to burn. I knew I had two choices. I could stay quiet and take it, or I could speak up and risk being the problem. I reached over and pressed the call button. The little blue light flickered on above my head, a tiny beacon of defiance in the quiet cabin. I didn't take my eyes off her. I watched her as she stood by the galley, whispering something to another flight attendant while glancing back at me. They weren't trying to help. They were looking at me like I was a malfunction in their perfect, expensive world. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I just sat there, my finger hovering near the button, waiting for the moment the service would finally include me, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, cold anticipation against the silence of the cabin. I've spent 20 years building walls of code and skyscrapers of equity just so I would never have to feel small in a room again. But apparently, in America, a three-piece suit is the only thing that keeps some people from seeing a criminal instead of a creator. It's funny, isn't it? You can have $1 billion in the bank. You can own the very infrastructure that people use to talk to their families. But if you're wearing a hoodie and some joggers at JFK, you're just another suspicious face in the crowd. Before we get deep into this, I want to ask you something, and I really want you to think about it. Have you ever walked into a place where you belonged? A place you paid for with your own hard-earned money, only to feel like you were trespassing? Have you ever seen that look in someone's eyes? That quick, sharp flicker of, "What are you doing here?" If you felt that weight, that invisible wall, drop a yes in the comments, or tell me where you're watching this from. It helps me know I'm not just shouting into the void. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I don't just tell stories for the drama. I tell them so we can start seeing each other for who we really are. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of New York morning where the air feels like wet wool. I was headed to Silicon Valley. This wasn't just any trip. I was going to finalize a merger that had been 18 months in the making. My company, a firm that specializes in high-end aerospace software and entertainment systems, stuff that literally keeps the world moving, was about to become a household name. I should have been on top of the world. I should have been feeling like a king. But I was tired. I was bone-deep exhausted. I hadn't slept in 48 hours because we were ironing out the final bugs in a massive update for Skylink, our flagship system. So, I dressed for comfort. I threw on my coding uniform, a charcoal gray hoodie, some black joggers, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. I didn't look like a CEO. I looked like a guy who might be heading to the gym, or maybe just hanging out on a Saturday. When I walked into the first-class lounge at JFK, the air changed. You know that sound a room makes when it goes quiet for just a split second? That's what happened. The lounge was all glass and white marble, smelling of expensive espresso and ego. I walked up to the mahogany desk, my black titanium card in my hand, and the woman behind the counter didn't even look at the card first. She looked at my shoes, then my pants, then my face. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Can I help you find the main terminal?" "Sir, this area is for premium passengers only." I felt that familiar sting, like a paper cut on the soul. I just held out the card. "I'm in the right place," I said, my voice low and steady. I've learned over the years that if I raise my voice, I'm the angry black man. If I'm too quiet, I'm submissive. I have to find that razor-thin line of professional indifference. She took the card with 2 fingers, as if it might be dirty. She swiped it. Then she swiped it again. She stared at the screen for a long time, her brow furrowed. I knew what she was seeing. My name, my status, the fact that I've flown enough miles with this airline to buy a small island. But she still didn't apologize. She just handed it back and said, "Go ahead." I found a corner seat, trying to blend into the shadows of the high-backed leather chairs. I had a conference call with my lead engineers. I put in my earbuds and started talking shop. We were discussing the integration of the admin bypass protocols, the God mode keys we use for emergency overrides. I'm talking about millions of lines of code. About $1, $2 billion in valuation, about the future of global connectivity. As I'm talking, I notice a movement in the corner of my eye. A security guard, a tall, white man with a buzz cut and a look of permanent suspicion, is standing about 10 feet away. He's not looking at the guy in the suit, spilled over with a gin and tonic at 9:00 a.m. He's not looking at the woman yelling into her phone about her divorce. He's looking at me. He starts pacing. Every time I make eye contact, he touches his belt, adjusting his radio. It's a dance I've seen 1,000 times. He's waiting for me to do something wrong. He's waiting for me to reach into my bag too fast or to stand up too abruptly. It's like being under a microscope while you're trying to run a marathon. The call ended, and I felt the shrapnel of that stare digging into my back. I stood up to grab a water from the fridge, and he stepped into my path. He didn't say anything, just stood there, forcing me to walk around him. It was a power move, a tiny, petty display of I can stop you whenever I want. I made it to the gate, thinking the worst was over. I just wanted to get on that plane, close my eyes, and disappear into the clouds. There's a certain peace in being 35, 0 feet up for a few hours. The world below doesn't matter. The rules of the ground don't always apply, or so I thought. When they called for first-class boarding, I stepped up. Again, the same ritual. The gate agent looked at my ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. She called her supervisor over. "Is there a problem?" I asked. My heart was starting to thud against my ribs. That dull, heavy beat that comes when you know you're about to be humiliated in public. Just a random security check. "Sir," she said, though she didn't check the person in front of me or the person behind me. They pulled me aside. I had to take off my shoes. I had to let them run a wand over my body while the other passengers filed past, their eyes full of that mixture of pity, and I knew it judgment. I stood there in my socks, feeling the cold floor through the fabric, thinking about my father. He used to tell me, "Son, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And once you get there, you have to work 4 times as hard just to stay." I used to think he was being cynical. Now, I realize he was just being a realist. Finally, they let me through. I walked down that long, narrow jet bridge, the air smelling of jet fuel and old carpet. I stepped onto the plane and turned left into the first-class cabin. Seat 1A, the best seat on the house. I sat down, the leather cool against my back, and let out a long, shaky breath. I was safe. I was in my element. I reached out and pressed the power button on the large, high-definition screen in front of me. I wanted to check the flight map, to see the progress of the storm we were supposed to fly around. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. The screen remained a cold, dead slab of black glass. I tried the remote in the armrest. Nothing. I looked around. The man in 1B, the same guy from the lounge who looked like he'd never worked a day in his life, was already watching a movie. His screen was bright, colorful, and perfect. I felt a surge of frustration. It wasn't just about the movie. It was about the fact that, even here, in the one place where I had paid for absolute perfection, something was broken. I looked for a flight attendant. A woman in a sharp navy blazer was walking down the aisle, handing out warm towels. I raised my hand. A small, polite gesture. "Excuse me," I said as she approached. "I think my entertainment system is down." She didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She just kept walking, her eyes fixed on the back of the cabin, as if I were made of glass. I waited. Maybe she didn't hear me. She came back a minute later with a tray of champagne. "Miss," I said, a bit louder this time, "my screen is broken. Could you help me reset it?" She stopped this time, but she didn't look at me. She looked at the champagne glasses. "We're in the middle of service." "Sir," she snapped. Her voice was like a whip, sharp and stinging. "You'll have to wait your turn. Honestly, you're lucky to even have a seat on this flight, given how full it is." She moved on to seat 1B. Her voice instantly changed. It became honey and silk. "Would you like another glass?" "Mr. Montgomery, and can I get you a pillow for your feet?" I sat there, my hand still halfway in the air, feeling the blood rush to my face. It wasn't the broken screen anymore. It was the lucky to have a seat comment. It was the implication that I was an interloper, a charity case, someone who should be grateful for the crumbs of her attention. I looked back at the black screen. I could see my own reflection in the glass, a middle-aged black man, tired, dressed in a hoodie, looking like someone who didn't belong in seat 1A. I felt that old familiar heat rising in my chest, that shrapnel starting to burn. I knew I had two choices. I could stay quiet and take it, or I could speak up and risk being the problem. I reached over and pressed the call button. The little blue light flickered on above my head, a tiny beacon of defiance in the quiet cabin. I didn't take my eyes off her. I watched her as she stood by the galley, whispering something to another flight attendant while glancing back at me. They weren't trying to help. They were looking at me like I was a malfunction in their perfect, expensive world. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I just sat there, my finger hovering near the button, waiting for the moment the service would finally include me, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, cold anticipation against the silence of the cabin. The terminal window on my screen was a stark contrast to the dim, judgmental atmosphere of the first-class cabin, while the world around me was filled with the scent of overpriced gin and the suffocating weight of prejudice. My digital world was a clean, logical expanse of white text on a black background. It was the one place where I was always the master, where my hoodie and joggers didn't trigger a security alert, and where the rules were written in a language I had helped perfect. My fingers danced across the mechanical keys, a rhythmic, percussive sound that seemed to grate on the nerves of everyone nearby. I could feel Brenda's presence before I heard her. She was coming back down the aisle, her steps quick and sharp, the sound of an authority figure who had finally run out of patience. Behind her, the heavy, rhythmic thud of the marshal's boots signaled that the safety lead wasn't far behind. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I was already deep into the architecture of the Skylink IFEC in-flight entertainment and communication system. This was my kingdom. Every node, every server, every line of the handshake protocol between the ground station and this Boeing 777 was something I had signed off on. Sir, I told you to put that away. Brenda's voice was a harsh whisper, vibrating with a mix of anger and genuine confusion. We are in a restricted phase of flight. Electronic devices of that size are not permitted to be out if they are interfering with crew instructions. You are directly defying a direct order from a federal officer. I didn't stop typing. I was navigating through the secondary firewall now. It was a beautiful piece of work. If I do say so myself, designed to keep out hackers, terrorists, and curious teenagers. But it had a back door, not a flaw, but a God mode access point we'd built in for catastrophic system failures. It required a 128-character encrypted key that only 4 people in the world knew. I was one of them. I'm just fixing a bug, I said, my voice as calm as a still lake. I wasn't being sarcastic. I wasn't being aggressive. I was being a technician. You told me the system was complex. Brenda, you told me it was user error. I'm just verifying that. The marshal reached over the seat, his large, calloused hand hovering just inches from my laptop screen. Last warning. Buddy, close it now, or I'm putting you in restraints. You're interfering with the safety of this aircraft. I don't care who you think you are or what kind of tech guy you're pretending to be. You're a passenger. And right now, you're a passenger who's about to go to jail. I hit the enter key. The sound that followed was subtle, but to my trained ears, it was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 digital hearts stopping at once. Across the cabin, the vibrant colors of movies and flight maps vanished. Mr. Montgomery's screen, which had been playing an explosion-filled blockbuster, turned into a flat, lifeless slab of black glass. The lady in 2B, who was halfway through a romantic comedy, let out a gasp of frustration. The kid in the row behind me started to whine as his cartoon disappeared. It wasn't just the screens. The ambient lighting in the cabin, the soft blue mood lighting that the airline bragged about in its commercials, flickered once and died, replaced by the harsh, utilitarian white of the emergency overheads. The hum of the cabin's local Wi-Fi router ceased. Even the flight attendants' handheld tablets, the ones they used to track meal preferences and passenger data, went dark. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a modern world suddenly stripped of its distractions. What did you do? Brenda shrieked. It wasn't a professional reprimand anymore. It was pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at her dead tablet, then at the black screens lining the cabin, then back at me. What did you do to the plane? The marshal didn't wait for an answer. He lunged forward, grabbing my shoulder with a grip that would have bruised a lesser man. Hands behind your back. Now, you just sabotaged a federal flight. You're done. You hear me? You're done. I didn't struggle. I didn't even flinch. I just looked him dead in the eye, my face a mask of cold, intellectual detachment. I didn't sabotage anything, I said, my voice carrying through the now silent cabin. I simply initiated a system-wide administrative lockout. I felt that if the environment was uncomfortable and unsafe because of my presence, then the systems I provided to this airline shouldn't be contributing to that environment. What are you talking about? The marshal roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He was reaching for his zip ties, his breath hot against my cheek. I'm talking about the fact that you're currently flying in a tube powered by my brain. I replied. I leaned back as much as his grip would allow, gesturing to the dead screen in front of me. I didn't break it. Officer, I just reminded you what happens when the person you're looking down on decides to stop looking up at you. You wanted me to be quiet. Well, now the whole plane is quiet. How do you like the silence, Mr.? Montgomery stood up, his face contorted in rage. You son of a… Do you have any idea who I am? I have a merger meeting in 3 hours. I need my files. I need the Wi-Fi. I glanced at him, a small, pitying smile touching my lips. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Montgomery. You're a man who thinks his champagne temperature is more important than another human being's dignity. And right now, you're a man with a very expensive, very useless seat. The chaos was beginning to spread. In the back of the plane, passengers were standing up, peering over seats, asking what was going on. The flight attendants were scurrying back and forth, trying to reset units that wouldn't respond. The God mode lockout didn't just turn things off. It wiped the local cache and refused any new handshake requests from the onboard server. To the plane's computer, it was as if the entertainment system had never existed. Suddenly, the curtain to the cockpit swung open with a violent jerk. The captain stepped out. He wasn't the calm, reassuring voice we'd heard over the intercom. He looked frazzled, his cap slightly askew, his eyes darting around the cabin. What is happening back here? He demanded. The entire IFEC array just dropped offline. The ground-to-air data link is unresponsive. We've lost our weather updates and our secondary comms. Brenda, what's going on? Brenda pointed a trembling finger at me. It's him. Captain. He did something with his laptop. The marshal was just about to arrest him. The captain turned toward me, his expression a mix of fury and authority. But as he got closer, as he saw me sitting there in my hoodie, my laptop still open to the terminal screen, his pace slowed. He squinted, his eyes scanning my face, then dropping to the code visible on my screen, the specific, proprietary headers of the Skylink kernel. He froze. He didn't look at the marshal. He didn't look at Brenda. He looked at the logo on the corner of my terminal window, the stylized S of Sterling Aerospace. Mr. Sterling. The captain stammered. His voice had lost all its edge. It was thin, reedy, filled with a sudden, dawning horror. The marshal frowned, his grip on my shoulder loosening just a fraction. You know this guy. Captain, he just took down the whole system. I'm taking him into custody. No, the captain barked, stepping between the marshal and my seat. No, you are absolutely not doing that. He turned back to me, his hands shaking slightly as he smoothed down his uniform. Mr. Sterling, I had no idea you were on this flight. I saw your keynote at the Aerospace Summit in Vegas last year. I'm an enormous fan of your work. The silence in the first-class cabin shifted. It was no longer the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a massive, collective realization. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Mr. Montgomery slowly sat back down, his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. I looked at the captain. He was a professional. He was just doing his job. But he was also the face of an organization that had just spent the last hour trying to break my spirit. The system isn't broken, Captain, I said, my voice echoing in the stillness. But your crew is, and your security protocols are. I'm sitting here in 1A, a seat I paid for, being threatened with federal prison because I asked for a working screen and didn't look the part of a premium passenger. So, the captain looked at Brenda. The look he gave her was one of pure, unmitigated disappointment. Then he looked at the marshal. Officer, release him. Now. This man is the CEO of the company that owns the software we are currently using to navigate this aircraft. If he says there's a problem, there's a problem. The marshal let go of my shoulder as if I had suddenly turned into a live wire. He backed away, his face a mask of confusion and bruised ego. He didn't apologize. Men like that never do. But he disappeared back toward the galley with a speed that was almost comical. I looked back at my laptop. The code was still there, pulsing gently, waiting for my next command. The entire plane was still in the dark. The God mode was still active. I could feel the captain's eyes on me, pleading, desperate. He needed that weather data. He needed the systems back. But I wasn't ready to give them back yet. Not until the weight of what had happened here truly sank in. I wanted them to feel the darkness. I wanted them to understand that the infrastructure they took for granted, the technology, the comfort, the very fabric of their privileged lives, was built and maintained by the very people they deemed suspicious when they saw them on the street. "Mr. Sterling," the captain whispered, leaning down so only I could hear him. "Please, I understand there's been a grave misunderstanding. We will handle the staff. There will be an internal review, but I need that link back up. We're heading into some chop over the Rockies, and I need those real-time updates." I looked at him, then at Brenda, who was now hiding behind the galley curtain, her face tear-streaked and pale. Then I looked at the black screen in front of me. I felt the power of the moment, the sheer, intoxicating weight of being able to say no. I didn't say a word. I just turned my gaze back to the keyboard, my fingers hovering over the command that would either restore their world or leave them in the dark for the rest of the journey. The cabin held its breath. The only sound, the low, distant whine of the engines and the frantic beating of my own heart as I prepared to make them wait just a little bit longer. The captain's eyes were fixed on my hands, those same hands Brenda had treated like they were carrying a contagion just 20 minutes ago. Now, those hands held the literal direction of the flight's data stream. I could see the reflection of my own terminal screen in his pupils, lines of scrolling green text that looked like a foreign language to him, but a declaration of independence to me. He stood there, shoulders hunched, his hat held against his chest in a gesture of unintentional supplication. He wasn't just asking for the Wi-Fi, he was asking me to bail out the reputation of his entire crew. I let the silence stretch. I wanted it to be heavy. I wanted it to be the kind of silence that forces a person to hear their own heartbeat. In the vacuum of that God mode lockout, the arrogance of the first-class cabin had completely evaporated. Mr. Montgomery, who had been so vocal about his merger meetings, was now staring at the back of his seat with the intensity of a man staring into a grave. The marshal was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the galley or the back of the plane, trying to figure out how to write a report that didn't end with him being sued into the next decade. 10 minutes, I said quietly, without looking up from the cursor that blinked with mechanical indifference. "Mr. Sterling," the captain whispered, leaning in closer. 10 minutes for what? 10 minutes of silence, I replied. 10 minutes for everyone in this cabin to sit with the fact that they were perfectly fine, with me being handcuffed for asking for a working screen. 10 minutes to realize that the person you profile today might be the person you need tomorrow. I'm not restoring the link until we're 10 minutes out from the Rockies. The captain swallowed hard. I could see the internal struggle in his face, the desire to command me to fix it versus the terrifying realization that he had no leverage. He knew that if he pushed me, I could just as easily walk off this plane at the next stop and pull his airline's entire software contract by Monday morning. He nodded slowly, a somber, defeated motion. I understand. I can't apologize enough for the environment my crew created. It's not representative of who we are. I finally looked him in the eye. Actually, Captain, it's exactly who you are when you think no one is watching. It's who you are when you think the man in the hoodie doesn't have a seat at the table. Your airline didn't fail me today. Your culture did. He didn't have an answer for that. He just turned and walked back into the cockpit, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a gavel hitting a block. I sat there, watching the time on my taskbar. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I spent them thinking about the irony of the situation. I had built this technology to connect people, to bridge the gap between the ground and the sky. And yet, here I was using it to create a wall. But sometimes, you have to build a wall just to show people how much they rely on the gate you've been keeping for them. I looked over at Brenda. She was standing by the beverage cart, her hands trembling so badly she couldn't even pour a glass of water for a passenger in row 3. She caught my gaze and immediately looked away, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. She wasn't the safety lead's confident ally anymore. She was just a woman who had realized she'd picked a fight with the wrong person. I didn't feel joy in her fear. I just felt a profound, weary sadness. I wondered how many other people she'd treated this way, who didn't have a God mode key in their pocket. How many people had she made feel small, who actually were small in the eyes of the law? Finally, the clock ticked over. We were approaching the jagged peaks of the Rockies, and I could feel the first few tremors of the chop the captain had mentioned. I didn't want to put the flight at risk. I'm not a monster. I'm a professional. I typed the final sequence. Pseudo-service, sky-linked-core, restart-force. I hit enter with a sharp, singular click. The response was instantaneous. It was like the plane had suddenly woken up from a coma. Across the cabin, 100 screens flickered to life simultaneously. The bright, neon logos of the airline's media partner bathing the cabin in a sudden wash of artificial light. The mood lighting shifted from the emergency white back to that soft, expensive violet. The Wi-Fi routers chirped, and suddenly, the air was filled with the ping and whoosh of 50 smartphones receiving a backlog of messages and emails. Mr. Montgomery's screen roared back to life with the sound of an explosion. He flinched, then immediately began tapping his screen with a frantic, desperate energy, trying to reconnect to his world. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. A moment later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was different this time, steady, but with a noticeable tremor of humility. Ladies and gentlemen, we've restored all systems. I'd like to personally thank the gentleman in seat 1A for his technical assistance. We are beginning our descent into the San Francisco area. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. The rest of the flight was conducted in a bizarre, reverent silence. No one complained about the champagne. No one buzzed the call button. The flight attendants walked through the cabin like they were walking on eggshells, avoiding eye contact with me as if I were a ghost. Brenda stayed in the back, never venturing past row 4 for the remainder of the journey. When the wheels finally touched the tarmac at SFO, the tension didn't dissipate, it just changed shape. As we taxied toward the gate, I saw something out the window that I'd expected, but it still felt surreal. There were 3 black SUVs parked near the jet bridge, and a group of men in suits were standing there, waiting. As soon as the fastened seatbelt sign turned off, I didn't rush to get up. I moved slowly, packing my laptop back into its leather sleeve, zipping up my hoodie. Mr. Montgomery practically ran off the plane, his briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield. I stepped off the plane and was met at the end of the jet bridge, not by the air marshal, but by the vice president of operations for the airline. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He reached out to shake my hand, his palm sweaty. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice urgent. "I am so incredibly sorry. We received the captain's report mid-flight. This is an unmitigated disaster for our brand. I want you to know that the flight attendant in question has been suspended pending termination. And we are filing a formal complaint regarding the marshal's conduct with his department." I looked at him, then at the black SUVs waiting to whisk me away to my merger meeting. "Termination shouldn't be your first instinct," I said, surprised by my own words. "Education should be, if you just fire her, she'll go to the next airline and do the same thing to the next black man in a hoodie. Teach her why she felt the need to call a marshal on a man asking for a working screen. That's the real bug in your system." He looked stunned, as if he expected me to demand blood. He just nodded, scribbling something on a legal pad. "Of course. Yes. We will look into a comprehensive sensitivity training overhaul. Whatever you need. Mr. Sterling, your contract is our top priority." I walked past him, through the terminal, and out into the crisp, cool air of Northern California. My driver was waiting, the door to the car open. As I sat in the back of that quiet, tinted window sedan, I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like a CEO. I still looked like a guy who'd been through a long, exhausting day. I thought about my father again. I thought about those oil-stained hands and the box he told me to build. I realized that the box I'd built wasn't the company, or the software, or the billion-dollar merger. The box was the dignity I refused to let them take. You see, the world is always going to try to tell you who you are based on the clothes you wear, the color of your skin, or the way you carry yourself. They're going to try to give you the broken screen and tell you to be grateful for the seat. But you have to remember that you are the architect of your own life. You hold the admin keys to your own soul. And sometimes, you have to turn the lights off just to show them how much you've been shining all along. If you've ever had to prove your worth in a room that didn't want you there, I want you to know that I see you. Don't let them make you bitter. Let them make you better. Build your empire. Keep your hoodie on. And never, ever let them tell you that you're lucky to have a seat. You bought that seat. You built that plane. And you are exactly where you're supposed to be. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had a God mode moment of your own, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about the truths we see in the sky that the world tries to hide on the ground, hit that subscribe button and join the family. We're building something real here. Stay strong. Stay seen. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. I'm sitting here in this room, small, gray, smelling like stale coffee and floor wax, and I can't help but look down at my wrists. These plastic zip ties are digging into my skin, leaving deep, red ridges that look ridiculous against the sleeves of a $4,000 Italian wool suit. It's funny, isn't it? You spend 30 years climbing a mountain, clawing your way up until you're the one making the decisions, the one everyone calls sir. And then, in the span of 30 minutes, you're right back to being a suspect. You're back to being a problem that needs to be handled. Mon, I need you to listen to me. I need you to really hear this, because I know some of you out there think we've moved past this. You think that if you work hard enough, if you play by the rules, if you get the degree and the title and the house with the manicured lawn, that you'll somehow buy your way out of the struggle. I thought that too. I really did. But let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you finally won the race? Only to realize the finish line was just moved another 10 miles down the road? Have you ever felt like no matter how much you achieve, you're still just a wrong person in a right place? Do me a favor, if you've ever felt that weight on your chest, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I need to know there's someone else out there who understands what it's like to have your soul bruised while you're wearing your best clothes. My name doesn't matter as much as the title I've earned. But for today, just think of me as a guy who did everything he was told to do. I'm 50 years old. I've spent my life in boardrooms. I've built a tech firm from 3 guys in a garage to a company that employs hundreds. I've negotiated mergers that would make your head spin. I'm a CEO. But today, none of that mattered. Today, I was just a black man in an airport. It started out as a great morning. You know those days where the sun hits just right, and you feel like the world is actually on your side. I was heading to D, C, for the biggest deal of my life, a merger that was going to cement my legacy and take care of my family for generations. I woke up early, kissed my wife, and put on my power suit. It's a charcoal gray Loro Piana. When I wear it, I usually feel like I'm wearing armor. I looked in the mirror, adjusted my silk tie, and thought, this is it. You've arrived. I pulled up to the airport in my car, the hum of the engine sounding like progress. I walked into the terminal with my head held high. I've got the status, the miles, the diamond level everything. I headed straight for the first-class check-in. There was no line, just one woman sitting behind the counter. She was young, maybe mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, looking down at her computer like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. I stood there for a second, waiting for her to look up. When she finally did, her eyes didn't go to my face. They went to my hands, then my suit, then back to my hands. There was this flicker in her expression. Not a smile, not a greeting, but a sort of confused squint. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was flat, like she was talking to someone who had lost their way to the bus station. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice smooth, the way I do when I'm about to close a deal. "I'm checking in for the 8:15 to D. C, first class." I handed her my ID and my frequent flyer card. She didn't take them right away. She looked at the card, then looked at me, then looked at the line behind me, which was empty. "The economy check-in is over there, sir," she said, pointing toward the crowded kiosks across the terminal. "This line is for priority passengers only." I felt that first little spark of heat in my gut. I've dealt with this 1,000 times, but it never gets easier. It's like a paper cut on your heart, small, but it stings every time you touch it. "I am a priority passenger," I said, sliding the card closer to her. "It's a diamond medallion account. My seat is 1A. She took the card gingerly, like it might be dirty. She tapped on her keyboard for what felt like an eternity. I watched her face. I saw the moment she found my name. I saw the moment she realized I was telling the truth. But did she apologize? Did she say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. CEO. Let me get that for you"? No. She just handed the card back without looking at me and printed the luggage tag. "Gate B12, she muttered. "Next." I took my boarding pass and walked away. I told myself to let it go. Don't let her ruin your energy. I thought, you've got a company to merge. You've got a legacy to build. I walked through the terminal, the scent of expensive coffee and Cinnabon swirling in the air. I went through the TSA pre-check. Even there, the officer spent an extra 10 seconds looking at my passport. glancing from the photo to my face and back again, like he was trying to find a reason it shouldn't be mine. I just smiled. I've learned that a smile is often the best weapon when you're being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing. I made it to the gate. I sat in the lounge for a bit, trying to focus on my notes for the meeting, but I could feel people looking at me. It's a specific kind of look. It's not a, hey, that guy looks successful. Look. It's a, what is he doing here? Look. I'm sitting there in a suit that costs more than their mortgage. And yet, I'm the one being scrutinized. I watched a group of businessmen in wrinkled khakis and polo shirts laughing loudly near the bar. No one looked at them twice. They belonged. They were the default. I was the exception. When they called for first-class boarding, I stood up. I felt a sense of relief. Once I'm on the plane, once I'm in my seat, I can just disappear into my work. I walk down the jet bridge. That long, narrow tunnel that always smells like jet fuel and recycled air. I reached the door of the aircraft, and the flight attendant gave me a quick nod. "Welcome aboard, sir." "Right. This way." I turned left into the first-class cabin. It was quiet, the leather seats looking soft and inviting. I found seat 1A. It's the best seat on the plane. Lots of legroom. Right at the front. I placed my leather briefcase in the overhead bin, making sure my laptop was accessible. I sat down and let out a long breath. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to melt away. Just a few hours. I told myself, just a few hours and you'll be in D. C, doing what you do best. But then, the atmosphere changed. You know that feeling when the temperature in a room suddenly drops. A woman walked into the cabin. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a cream-colored trench coat and carrying a designer handbag that she held against her chest like a shield. She had this air of practiced elegance, the kind of woman who has never had to wait in a line in her entire life. She stopped at row 1. She looked at the seat number. Then she looked at me. Her face didn't just sour, it curdled. She looked at me sitting in 1A with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated disdain. She didn't say a word to me. Instead, she turned around and looked for the flight attendant. I stayed still. I didn't move a muscle. I could feel my heart starting to thud against my ribs. A slow, rhythmic reminder that the peace I'd just found was an illusion. I reached out and gripped the armrests of my seat. The leather was cool, but my palms were starting to sweat. I stared straight ahead at the bulkhead wall, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw her gesturing wildly toward me, her voice a sharp, whispered hiss that cut through the quiet of the cabin. I closed my eyes for a second. Trying to stay centered, I thought about my father. I thought about how he used to tell me, "Son, they're going to try to make you feel small. Don't let them." I opened my eyes and looked over at her. She was pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. Her face flushed a deep, angry pink. The flight attendant was leaning in, nodding, her expression shifting from professional politeness to something much more guarded and suspicious as she turned her gaze toward me. I didn't say anything. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, feeling that old, familiar coldness creeping up my spine, waiting to see what version of the truth was about to be forced upon me. I slowly reached down, my fingers trembling just slightly, and clicked my seatbelt into place, the sharp clink of the metal sounding like a gavel bringing a court to order. The metal buckle felt heavy against my lap, almost like a weight keeping me anchored to a reality I didn't want to face. I kept my eyes locked on the seat back in front of me, focusing on the tiny textures in the plastic, trying to breathe through the heat rising in my neck. I didn't have to look up to know that the woman in the cream trench coat was still standing there. And I didn't have to strain my ears to hear the sharp, jagged edges of her voice as she spoke to the flight attendant. "I'm just saying, I don't feel comfortable," she whispered, though it was that kind of stage whisper that's meant to be heard by everyone within 3 rows. I have a very expensive timepiece. And, well, look at the situation. Are you sure he's supposed to be here? In this section. The flight attendant? A woman named Sarah, according to her silver name tag. Didn't offer a word of defense. She didn't check the manifest again. She didn't tell the woman that I was a frequent flyer, or that I'd paid 5 times what most people paid for their tickets. She just leaned in, her eyes darting toward me with a look that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite anger. It was something worse. It was the look of someone deciding that my presence was a problem that needed to be solved, so the real customers could be happy. "Ma'am, please," Sarah said, her voice low and smoothing. "If you could just take your seat for a moment. I'll see what I can do about a relocation. But we are at capacity in first class. I am not sitting next to him." The woman snapped, her voice rising now, losing the pretense of a whisper. I had my watch in the side pocket of my bag when I was boarding. I set it down for 1 second to get my phone out. And now, it's not there. And he was right behind me. He was crowding me. I felt my jaw tighten so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I hadn't crowded anyone. I had given her a wide berth, the way I always do in public spaces. I've learned that as a man of my size and my color. You have to navigate the world like you're made of glass, always moving carefully, always making sure you don't take up too much space, always trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. I had stood 4 feet back. I had looked at the floor. I had played the game. And yet, here I was, being accused of being a common thief in the middle of a cabin full of people who looked like her and not like me. Man, you have to understand the mental gymnastics you have to do in a moment like that. One half of me, the CEO, the man who runs a company with a $300 million valuation, wanted to stand up, look her in the eye, and tell her that my time was worth more than her entire life savings. I wanted to show her my bank balance, my credentials, the letter from the governor sitting in my briefcase. I wanted to roar. But the other half of me, the black man who grew up in a neighborhood where a loud voice could get you a night in a cell or worse, knew that any display of emotion would just be proof of my guilt. If I got angry, I was the angry black man. If I was firm, I was aggressive. So I just sat there. I stayed small. "Sir?" It was Sarah. She was standing in the aisle now, blocking my view of the rest of the plane. She wasn't smiling anymore. "Sir, this lady is concerned about a missing item. Did you happen to see a gold watch near the jet bridge? Or when you were putting your bag up?" I looked up at her. I tried to make my eyes as calm as possible, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "No," I said, my voice coming out raspy. I didn't see anything. I went straight to my seat and sat down. "I haven't moved." The woman in the trench coat scoffed. "He's lying. I saw him looking at my bag. Why else would he be in such a hurry to get to the front? He didn't even have a carry-on that looked like it belonged in first class. It's a leather bag. Probably fake." I looked at my briefcase in the overhead bin. It was hand-stitched Italian leather, a gift to myself when we hit our first 10 million in revenue. It was a symbol of everything I had overcome. And to her, it was just fake. Everything about me was a fraud in her eyes. I was an intruder in her world, and she was the self-appointed gatekeeper. The other passengers started to murmur. I could hear the rustle of clothes as people leaned out into the aisle to see the drama. I could feel the heat of a dozen cameras, those invisible lenses of judgment, pointed right at the back of my head. Nobody said, "Hey, leave the man alone." Nobody said, "Maybe you just dropped it." They just watched. They waited for the show. "Sir," Sarah said, her tone getting sharper, "I'm going to have to ask you to step out into the galley for a moment, while we sort this out. We can't depart until this is resolved." "Why do I have to move?" I asked. I tried to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I'm in my assigned seat. I've done nothing wrong. Why aren't you asking her to look in her bag again?" "I've looked." The woman screamed. "I've looked 3 times. It's gone." He took it. "Sir, please don't make this difficult," Sarah said. She reached out toward my arm, then pulled back at the last second, as if she realized she shouldn't touch me. "It's just a precaution. If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." That phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," it's the ultimate trap. It assumes that your privacy and your dignity have no value. It assumes that I should be happy to be humiliated as long as I'm innocent. But I wasn't happy. I was dying inside. I felt like I was being stripped naked in front of a crowd. I looked around the cabin. There was a man across the aisle, a guy in a blazer who looked like he worked in finance. He met my eyes for a split second, then quickly looked down at his iPad. He knew. He saw what was happening, but he wasn't going to risk his comfort for my justice. Nobody was. I unbuckled the belt. The click felt like a betrayal. I stood up, smoothing out my suit jacket, trying to hold on to some shred of the man I had been when I walked into the terminal. I stepped into the aisle, and the woman in the trench coat practically jumped back, as if I were a wild animal that had just escaped its cage. "See," she cried, pointing at me. "Look at him. He's trying to be intimidating. I'm 6'2". I've played sports my whole life. I'm a big man. But in that moment, I felt like a child. I followed Sarah to the small, cramped galley at the front of the plane. The curtain was pulled shut, but it didn't block out the sound of the whispers from the cabin. It didn't block out the feeling of being other. A second flight attendant was there, an older man with a gray mustache. He didn't look at me. He was busy on the phone. "Yeah, we have a situation on flight 1422. Potential theft. We're going to need authorities at the gate." "No, we haven't pushed back yet." "Understood." He hung up and finally looked at me. "You need to stay right here." "Sir, don't touch anything. I have a meeting," I said, and my voice sounded small even to me. "A very important meeting indeed. See, if I miss this, it's not just a flight. It's years of work. Well, you should have thought about that before you decided to take things that don't belong to you," the woman in the trench coat said, poking her head through the curtain. I looked at her. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, and for a second, I think she saw the sheer, soul-crushing exhaustion in my eyes. She saw that I wasn't a thief, that I was just a tired man who wanted to go to work. But she didn't care. She had a narrative, and I was the villain. She ducked back into the cabin, satisfied. The minutes ticked by like hours. The air in the galley was hot and smelled of coffee grounds and disinfectant. I stood there, my hands at my sides, afraid to even reach into my pocket for a tissue. I didn't want them to think I was reaching for something. I just stood, perfectly still, while the rest of the world moved on without me. Through the small window in the galley door, I could see the jet bridge. I saw a flash of blue, then another. 2 police officers were walking toward the plane. They weren't strolling. They were moving with purpose. They had that heavy-footed walk of men who were coming to restore order. The door of the aircraft groaned as it was opened from the outside. The cold, sterile air of the jet bridge rushed in, clashing with the recycled warmth of the cabin. The 2 officers stepped inside. They were white. Both of them. They had their hands resting on their belts, right near their holsters. They looked at the flight attendants. Then their eyes locked onto me. It wasn't a question of what happened. It was a look of, "We found him." One of the officers, a guy with a buzz cut and a jaw like a block of granite, stepped forward. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask for my ID. He just looked at my suit, then at my face, and I saw the instant dismissal in his eyes. To him, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a passenger. I was a 10 code. I was a call on a Saturday morning. "All right," he said, his voice booming in the small space. "Let's keep this quiet and professional. Sir, you're going to need to come with us. Now, officer, I can explain." I started, but he held up a hand. "Save it for the station. We've got a witness who says you took high-value property. We're going to need to search you and your belongings." "Wait," I said, feeling a surge of panic. "I have a briefcase in the overhead. My whole life is in that bag. You can't just, we can do whatever we need to do," the other officer said. Stepping closer, I could smell the peppermint on his breath and the metallic scent of his gear. "You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Personally, I don't care which one you choose." He reached for his belt and pulled out a pair of thick, black plastic zip ties. He didn't even use real handcuffs. He used the disposable kind, the kind you use for mass arrests. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was unnecessarily tight, his fingers digging into the tendons of my forearm. I didn't resist. I knew better. I stood there, surrounded by the smell of jet fuel and the sound of my own shallow breathing. As he pulled my arms behind my back, I felt the sharp plastic teeth of the tie zip shut. The sound a series of rapid-fire clicks that echoed off the metal walls of the galley. The pressure was immediate, a stinging bite that forced my shoulders into an awkward, hunched position. I looked down at the floor, seeing the scuff marks on the linoleum, while the officer began to push me toward the open door of the plane. My movement stiff and unnatural as the weight of the suit I'd been so proud of began to feel like a shroud. The jet bridge felt like a gauntlet, a narrow, ribbed tunnel of plastic and cold air that seemed to stretch on forever. Every step I took, with my hand cinched behind my back, felt heavy, like my shoes were made of lead. I could feel the eyes of the flight crew on the back of my neck. The silence behind me was louder than any shout. But it was when we stepped out of that tunnel and back into the main terminal that the world truly tilted on its axis. You know that feeling when you're having a nightmare and you're trying to scream, but no sound comes out. That was me. I walked out into the gate area, and the first thing I saw was a sea of glowing screens. People weren't just watching, they were recording. I saw a young guy in a hoodie, probably no older than my own son, holding his phone up with a smirk. I saw a woman in a business suit, someone who probably would have been shaking my hand in a boardroom tomorrow, looking at me with this mix of fear, and I told you so. I tried to keep my head up. I really did. I tried to channel that CEO energy, the man who walks into a room and commands attention. But how do you command attention when your wrists are bound in plastic? How do you look like a leader when you're being marched like a trophy through a public space by two men who clearly don't see a human being? But a problem solved. The suit, my beautiful, charcoal gray armor, felt like a costume now. It felt like I was a kid playing dress-up, and the world had finally caught me. "Keep moving, sir," the officer with the buzz cut muttered, his hand firm on my bicep. He wasn't just guiding me, he was steering me, making sure everyone saw the threat they had neutralized. "Can you at least tell me where we're going?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out thin. I hated that. I hated that they had the power to make me sound like a victim. "We're going where people like you go when they don't know how to act," the other officer said. He didn't even look at me. He was busy talking into his shoulder-mounted radio. "Yeah, we have the suspect in custody. Bringing him down to the secondary hold now. Clear the hallway. People like me." I whispered the words, more to myself than to him. The weight of that phrase sat in my stomach like a stone. I've spent 25 years making sure I wasn't people like me. I've spent 25 years being the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I've donated millions to charities. I've mentored kids who looked like me, telling them that if they just worked hard enough, the world would open its doors. And here I was, being reminded that those doors have a very specific lock, and I didn't have the key. They led me through a heavy steel door and down a flight of concrete stairs. The bright, sterile light of the terminal gave way to a dim, yellowed hallway that smelled of industrial floor wax and something sour, like old sweat. We arrived at a room labeled Interrogation 2. It wasn't a room for a CEO. It was a box. 4 gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a single light fixture that buzzed with a low, irritating hum. The officer with the buzz cut pushed me toward a chair. "Sit." I sat. The plastic ties bit deeper into my skin as my arms hit the back of the chair. He reached around and, with a quick snip of a pair of heavy shears, cut the ties. I expected to feel a sense of relief, but all I felt was the stinging rush of blood returning to my hands and the lingering shame of the bind. I rubbed my wrists, looking at the deep, angry red lines. "Empty your pockets," the other officer said. He sat across from me. Pulling out a notepad, I started pulling things out. My phone, my wallet, the one made of ostrich leather that my wife gave me for our anniversary, my keys, a pack of sugarless gum. "The wallet," the officer said, pointing at it. "Open it." I opened it. He watched as I flipped through the cards. Platinum, black, diamond. He saw the cash. He saw the photos of my kids. But his expression didn't change. He wasn't looking for proof of my life. He was looking for a reason to keep me in this room. "What do you do for a living?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I'm the CEO of a technology firm," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm on my way to D. So, for a merger, if you check my briefcase, which you took from the plane, you'll find my credentials. You'll find the contracts. You'll find a CEO." "Huh." He interrupted me with a dry, hollow laugh. He looked at his partner. "Hear that? Mike, we got Elon Musk's brother here. Funny how all you guys are CEOs or musicians the minute you get caught with your hand in someone else's bag." "I didn't touch her bag," I said, my voice rising. I was 4 feet away from that woman. She's lying, or she's mistaken. Either way, I am not a thief. "Look," Mike the buzzcut officer said, leaning over the table until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "The lady says she saw you. The flight attendant says you were being difficult. And let's be honest, you don't exactly blend in at the front of a plane. People in first class don't usually look like they're ready for a street fight." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. A street fight. I'm wearing a $4,000 suit. "Officer, I'm carrying a briefcase. I was reading a Wall Street journal. What about me looks like a street fight?" He just shrugged. "It's an energy. Man, you got that look, like you're looking for trouble. That's the psychological tax I was talking about. Right there. That's the fee we pay just to breathe. It doesn't matter if you have a PhD or $1 billion. To some people, your energy is always a threat. Your presence is always a provocation. I sat there, and for a moment, I just felt tired. Not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep can fix. It was a soul weariness. I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent to make white colleagues feel comfortable. I thought about the times I'd dressed up just to go to the grocery store so no one would follow me in the aisles. And it still wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. "Where's my bag?" I asked quietly. "The briefcase. It's being processed." The first officer said, "We're checking for the watch. If it's in there, you're looking at a felony. Grand larceny. You really want to blow your tech firm over a gold watch? Check the bag," I said. "Please, just check the bag." He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with Mike. Mike didn't talk. He just leaned against the door, arms crossed, staring at me like I was a specimen in a jar. I looked at the table. I saw a tiny scratch in the metal. Someone's initials carved into the surface. I wondered who else had sat here. I wondered if they were innocent, too. Or if, like me, their innocence didn't actually matter as much as the story being told about them. I closed my eyes and thought of my wife. She'd be waiting for my call when I landed. She'd be asking how the flight was, if I'd managed to get any sleep. How was I supposed to tell her that I was sitting in a basement room because a woman in a cream coat didn't like the way I looked in seat 1A? How was I supposed to tell my son that all the things I'd taught him about the American dream were only half-truths? The door creaked open. The first officer came back in. He was carrying my leather briefcase. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. "All right, Mr. CEO," he said, his voice still mocking. "Let's see what's in the secret stash." He flicked the latches. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the small room. He flipped the lid open. I watched his face. I knew exactly what was in there. He started pulling things out. A high-end laptop, a leather-bound notebook, a set of expensive noise-canceling headphones. He tossed them onto the table with no regard for their value. Then, he reached into the side pocket. He pulled out a thick, blue folder. "What's this?" he asked. "The merger documents," I said. "Highly confidential. I'd appreciate it if you didn't." He ignored me and started flipping through the pages. His eyes moved quickly over the legal jargon. The signatures, the corporate seals. I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. He reached back into the bag and pulled out a single, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy cardstock, with a gold seal on the back. He opened it. He pulled out the letter inside. I watched him read it. I watched his eyes widen. I watched the way his posture changed, the way his shoulders dropped. Just an inch. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The letter was personal. It was hand-signed by the governor of this very state. It wasn't just a thank you note. It was an invitation. It thanked me for my unparalleled leadership and my visionary contributions to the state's economic future. It invited me to a private dinner at the mansion to discuss a new technology initiative. The officer looked at the letter. Then he looked at the name on my ID, which was still sitting on the table. Then he looked at me. "This," he started, his voice suddenly losing its edge. "This is from Governor Harrison." "Yes," I said. I didn't say it with pride. I said it with a cold, hard clarity. He's a personal friend. We were supposed to have dinner tonight after my meeting in D.C. The officer looked at his partner. Mike moved away from the door, his arms dropping to his sides. The room, which had felt so small and aggressive just a moment ago, was now deathly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the light and the distant, muffled announcement of a flight departing somewhere far above us. The officer held the letter with both hands now, his fingers trembling slightly at the edges of the paper. He looked down at the briefcase, then at the pile of my belongings scattered across the metal table, and finally back at me, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out as he realized the magnitude of the cliff he had just walked over. I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the governor's gold seal, feeling the silence in the room thicken until it was almost impossible to breathe. The silence in that interrogation room didn't just feel heavy anymore. It felt like it was vibrating. That officer, the one who had been so sure of himself, so eager to see a criminal under my skin, held that cream-colored stationery with fingers that were suddenly trembling. He didn't just put the letter back down on the metal table. He placed it there as if it were a fragile piece of ancient glass that might shatter and cut his hands if he moved too fast. He looked at the gold seal, then at his partner, Mike, and then finally at me, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the consequences of his own assumptions. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling, he stammered. His voice had gone from a jagged, authoritative bark to a soft, pathetic whine. He even used my name. It's funny how quickly people learn your name when they realize you have the power to ruin their career. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, rubbing my wrists where those plastic ties had been. The blood was flowing back into my hands, but my heart felt like it was made of ice. I let the silence stretch out. In my world, in the boardroom, silence is a weapon. If you wait long enough, the other person will eventually hang themselves with their own words. I watched the sweat beat on his forehead. I watched him swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. We were just following protocol, Mike said from the doorway, though his voice lacked the conviction it had 10 minutes ago. A high-value theft was reported. We had a positive ID from a witness who didn't even know my name, I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. A witness who saw a black man in a seat she didn't think he belonged in and decided he was a thief. And you didn't just follow protocol. You followed a script that was written long before either of us was born. I stood up. I didn't ask for permission. I stood up and straightened my Loro Piana jacket. Pulling the sleeves down to cover the red marks on my wrists, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For 30 years, I had been running toward success, running away from the stereotypes, running to prove that I was one of the good ones. But standing in that dingy, yellow-lit room, I realized that I was tired of running. The door to the room swung open, hitting the wall with a loud clack. A man in a crisp white shirt with gold bars on his shoulders walked in. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. The captain. He took one look at the letter sitting on the table, then at me, and his face went remarkably pale. "Mr. Sterling," he said, stepping forward and extending a hand. "I'm Captain Miller. I just received a call from the airline's corporate security. It seems there's been a mistake." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at it until he slowly pulled it back, looking embarrassed. "A mistake. Captain, that's a very polite word for what just happened." My wrists were tied. I was paraded through a terminal full of people like a common criminal. I was told I looked like I was looking for a street fight by your officers. "Is that the mistake you're referring to?" Miller cleared his throat, glancing sharply at the two officers who were now trying to blend into the gray paint of the walls. The passenger. She found her watch. "Sir, it was tucked into the side pocket of her own handbag. She claims she overlooked it in her distress. She's currently being escorted out of the airport." Overlooked it. I repeated. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. She overlooked it. And because of her oversight. My reputation is currently being dismantled on social media by every person who had their phone out at gate B12 because of her oversight. I've missed a merger meeting that took 3 years to put together. We are deeply sorry for the inconvenience, sir, Miller said, his voice dripping with the kind of corporate sincerity that means absolutely nothing. We'll make sure a formal apology is issued. We can even provide an escort to a later flight. Or, I don't want your apology, Captain, and I certainly don't want your escort, I said. I reached out and picked up the governor's letter, folding it carefully and sliding it back into my briefcase. What I want is for you to understand that you didn't do this to me because of a watch. You did this because you could. You did this because, in your mind, my success is just a disguise. I picked up my phone and my wallet from the table. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but it wasn't the kind you get before a big speech. It was the kind you get before a battle. I realized that the merger in D.C. didn't matter anymore. That deal was about money. This was about something much bigger. I'm going to make a phone call now, I said, looking Miller dead in the eye. I'm going to call my legal team. Then I'm going to call Governor Harrison. Not to ask for a favor, but to tell him that the economic future he wants to discuss isn't possible as long as his police force operates on the assumption that a black man in first class is a crime in progress. I walked out of that room. I didn't wait for them to open the door. I pushed past them, my leather briefcase swinging at my side. I walked back up those concrete stairs and out into the terminal. The airport was still buzzing. People were still rushing to their gates, clutching their overpriced lattes and staring at the flight boards. But as I walked through the terminal, I felt different. I wasn't trying to blend in anymore. I wasn't trying to look non-threatening. I walked with the full weight of who I was. I found a quiet corner near a window overlooking the tarmac. I watched a plane take off, a silver bird disappearing into the clouds. And I thought about the man I was when I woke up this morning. He was a man who believed that a suit could protect him. He was a man who thought that if he climbed high enough, the air would be cleaner. I pulled out my phone and dialed my vice president. He picked up on the first ring. Marcus, you at the hotel yet? The legal team is waiting for the pre-brief, he said, sounding frantic. The merger is off. David, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. What? Marcus, what are you talking about? This is the deal. This is the one we've been waiting for. Tell them something came up. Tell them I had a more important meeting, I said. Watching my own reflection in the glass, I looked at the red marks on my wrists, which were still visible. I'm not coming to D.C. today. I'm staying right here. I'm going to hire the best civil rights firm in the country, and we're going to start a foundation, not for tech, David, for justice. We're going to make sure that the next kid who puts on a suit doesn't have to wonder if it's actually a target. I hung up the phone. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It was the weight of trying to be perfect in an imperfect world. I looked at the people walking by. I saw a young black girl holding her mother's hand, looking up at the big planes with wide, wondering eyes. She smiled at me, and for the first time all day, I smiled back. A real smile. Mon, if you're still listening to this, I want you to take something away from it. Don't let the world tell you who you are. Don't let them make you feel small just because they can't handle your shadow. The suit I'm wearing, it's just fabric. The title on my business card, it's just ink. The real power, the real success, is in the fact that they couldn't break me. They tried to take my dignity, but all they did was remind me how much of it I actually have. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong in a space you worked hard to enter, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to know that their value isn't determined by someone else's narrow vision. And if you want to be part of the change, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. I walk toward the exit of the airport, the glass doors sliding open to let in the humid afternoon air. I didn't look back at the security gates or the check-in counters. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing against the pavement as I headed toward my car, finally ready to stop running and start leading.